For as many great games Sony releases, there are many games and franchises that have been abandoned. Killzone is one of those franchises. For almost 10 years, Killzone was a pretty important FPS that was exclusive to Sony. Of course, that importance is long gone at this point, as the last Killzone came out over 10 years ago in 2013. But what about the future? Will we ever see it brought back in some way? Though it may not be likely, it is not impossible. Let's dive in as to why. Like I mentioned, Killzone as a franchise did not even last 10 years. The first Killzone was made by Guerrilla Games and released in 2004. Though it looked impressive, those controls were not good for shooting Hellghast, the enemies of the game. Killzone 2 then released in 2009 to rave reviews. The story and visuals were impressive, and the shooting mechanics were also good. It went on to sell over 1 million copies, which at the time was very good for Sony. Then Killzone 3 released in 2011 to really good reviews as well. I think the consensus was that it was not quite as good as Killzone 2, but good god, the graphics were absolutely stunning. Sure, it had an unstable frame rate, but this game running on a PS3 is unbelievable. Unfortunately, I could not find sales numbers for Killzone 3, but a GameFAQs post seemed to point out that it was actually selling worse than Killzone 2 in the first few weeks. Not a very good look considering there were 20 million PS3s sold when Killzone 2 came out and 48 million when Killzone 3 came out. But it's also a post on a random site, so who knows. The simple reason for the lackluster sales was that when Killzone 3 came out, there was significant competition. Since competition doesn't just go away, this factor also affected Killzone Shadowfall, the sequel to Killzone 3. Shadowfall was a launch game for the PlayStation 4 coming out in November 2013. Now, many videos have been done on why Shadowfall killed the franchise, so I will keep this as brief as I can. The game was a technical marvel that showed off the PS4's power to a great extent. However, the game itself simply was not good enough. Now, in my opinion, it was not bad. The gameplay and shooting mechanics were pretty good, and the inclusion of a drone with abilities was pretty cool. However, the story and its premise were relatively dumb. I also wanted to continue the storyline of Killzone 3 and see what happened next with those characters, not jump far into the future and play as someone else. Also, the ending annoyed the hell out of me. You took away the characters I cared about, threw me into playing as this character, kind of made him compelling, and then just killed him off randomly. Wait, you're betraying me? Oh, you actually killed me. Okay. I guess I was not the only one who felt this way. When talking about Shadowfall, people routinely complain about the story. Why there is such an emphasis on the story is because Killzone stories up until then had actually been really good and compelling. Furthermore, Shadowfall had an emphasis on stealth, and you never really fought a bunch of Hellghast at once. Because of this, it meant any flaws elsewhere in the game would become much more prominent since the gameplay was not as great and could not distract you as much. Ultimately, it did sell over 2 million copies, but the game could not retain its player base after launch. The multiplayer had almost no one except bots playing, though apparently it was really fleshed out with fun, diverse game modes. I say apparently because I was one of the people who never went back to the game. Though the 2 million in sales were better than the previous Killzone game's performance, it did not impress Sony and/or Guerrilla enough to make another one. The rest is history. Guerrilla somehow successfully pivoted to making a great open-world game, releasing Horizon Zero Dawn in 2017, then releasing its sequel, Horizon Forbidden West, in 2022. In April 2023, Guerrilla announced Forbidden West sales numbers reached over 8.4 million. Shortly after, near the end of that same month, it was unofficially confirmed that the sequel to Forbidden West was greenlit. So with this news, it seems Guerrilla will be preoccupied with Horizon 3 for at least the next few years. So where could Killzone come into play, if at all? Would we see a sequel or a continuation, or what about a remastered collection? Or will Killzone simply remain dead? I personally believe we see a return, and I actually think a reboot would be the most likely. There's a few reasons for me thinking this. First off, a new Killzone obviously would not want to be attached to Shadowfall, since that was the game that killed the franchise. In the same vein, that also means they can create an entirely separate story or choose to remake and update the original story for a modern audience. Killzone has great lore as well as unique and terrifying enemies. Guerrilla has also come a long way as a studio, and they do a great job with their stories and storytelling in the Horizon games. So creating a compelling story against an enemy like the Hellghast could be awesome. A second reason that Killzone could come back is that Sony has a demand for a game like this. Currently, it does not have an exclusive FPS game, at least not a single-player title. They have Destiny, but that's a looter shooter and is inherently different. It's also not doing great at the moment. Regardless, a modern Killzone could show off what the PS5 can do. The Decima engine is an absolute beast, so much so that Horizon Forbidden West, an open-world game, is a master class in showing off the power of the PS5. Now imagine a much more linear game like Killzone. It would be one of the best-looking games out there. Essentially, a new Killzone could be Sony's exclusive equivalent to Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal had awesome gameplay, crazy fun mechanics, a cool story, and ridiculously impressive graphics and performance. A new Killzone made by the right people could be the same type of game. Not the same fast-paced gameplay as Doom, but compelling gameplay with Killzone's DNA. Last but not least, FPS games are much more cost-effective and less risky. For reference, Horizon Forbidden West took 5 years to make and had a huge development budget of $212 million. This is because it's a AAA open-world game. Linear first-person shooters, on the other hand, naturally require much less time to make, which inherently cuts down on costs. Also add in the fact that making linear maps and levels are cheaper to make than an open world map, the overall cost of an FPS game is usually far below what it costs to make open world games. From this perspective, it's lower risk, higher reward. A cheaper game that sells a ton? That's the dream for companies like Sony. However, there are also reasons we have not seen a return, as there are multiple issues with the new Killzone game. The first, as mentioned earlier, is Guerrilla is busy with Horizon 3. Guerrilla is estimated to have between 350 to 400 employees. Given the fact that over 300 employees were working on Horizon Forbidden West, there was not enough people left over to make another game, at least not without substantially hiring a bunch. This is unfortunate since I believe Guerrilla is the only studio who could tackle Killzone, and probably one of the only ones who would want to. There is also no other Sony studio whose background makes sense for making a new Killzone game. The closest other studio could be Bluepoint if they wanted to do more of a one-to-one remake of Killzone, but that does not seem likely at all. A second issue is that there is stiff competition in the industry. Apex Legends, Call of Duty, and other huge multiplayer FPS games can kill even good first-person shooters. Not to mention, a Killzone game would have an emphasis on single-player. If a new Killzone released, it would need a great single-player campaign and great multiplayer modes to survive. Even then, would Killzone really be able to draw enough gamers away from the other large FPS games? Possibly not, and that's also part of the reason Shadowfall failed over a decade ago. It did not survive against the competition then, so doing so now would be even more difficult. Lastly, I would like to bring up that there's been absolutely no news or even rumors of Killzone coming back in any way, so the possibility of Killzone returning is not great. Still, there is always hope. Killzone was a franchise that was filled with so much potential, a franchise that at least at one point was great. Perhaps it is destined to remain in Sony's vault, never to be touched again, but for some reason I don't believe that will be the case. In a gaming landscape filled with so many multiplayer and live service games, a great single-player FPS game is always a welcome change of pace. Ultimately, though, it will be up to Sony or Guerrilla to bring Killzone back. If they do, I think it could be one hell of a good time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.